So we have completed the causes which led to the first war of independence. Now we'll be studying what were the consequences. What happened after the fight? Basically the fight was been won by the Britishers, but it had some good impact on India. What was the first impact? That there was an end of company's rule. Earlier, India was being ruled by the East India Company, and now all the authority of East India Company, it was being taken away from the East India Company, and now the authority was being transferred to Queen Victoria. How did East India Company had a firm grip over the India? The East India Company in the 17th century had came into India just with the purpose of having a business transaction, but the profits of East India Company increased tremendously. So with that profit, they started up to arrange the soldiers. They set up a military in India, and one by one they kept on attacking the Indian territories, and almost whole of India was under the East India Company. But after the war, it was the company's rule was being ended, and it transferred all the power to Queen Victoria. Okay, so what the first point, it can come for a 4 mark question that explain end of company's rule, or they can also ask the what were the Government of India Act of 1858, what were the provisions, what were the statements given in this act. So first, it transferred the power to govern India from India Company to the British Crown, that is the Queen Victoria. It is the first point. Second, now when the power was under East India Company, the East India Company was being ruled by a team of board of directors. Who are board of directors? Basically, they are the head of the companies who had started the company. So during East India Company, the companies, all the major policies were being decided by the board of directors. So now it was transferred from board of directors to the secretary of a state. That is, the India was earlier in the hands of directors of the company and the board. Earlier it was in the hands of boards, and now the power was to be exercised by the secretary of the state. So I can say here there was a transfer from East India Company to the British Crown. Here it is a transfer from board of directors to the secretary of the state. And even he should be aided yani helped by a council. What is a council? It is a around 5 to 6 it is a team of 5 to 6 members, is known as a council. The secretary of state was a member of the British cabinet and was responsible to the parliament, and therefore we can say, even as a consequences, India had not got any ultimate power. The ultimate power over India remained with the British parliament. Just there was a transfer of East India Company to the British crown. Next point is actual governance was to be carried on as before, that is by the Governor General, who was given as the Viceroy title. And who was that first Viceroy? Lord Canning was the first Viceroy under this act. Okay. Next, appointment to all the civil services. Civil services, that is the government offices. Appointment to the government offices were to be made by open competition. What is open competition? That everyone will be given jobs on the basis of merit and not on the basis of caste or section, that you belong to a certain caste then you'll get the job. No, whoever gets the major marks, he will be selected for that civil services under rules made by the Secretary of State. This is the first brief, that is the end of company's rule. Next is Queen Victoria's proclamation. What do you mean by proclamation? Proclamation means a formal announcement. She had made a formal announcement that she had promised something while she was being selected as the vice. She had been, when the transfer of power was been done to her. So on November 1, 1858, by Lord Canning, the first viceroy of India. The proclamation promised that the government of India would. What all promises did she made to the people of India? That first, she would not interfere in the social and the religious matters of Indians, like we had studied earlier, that they interfered in the Western girls' education, abolition of sati, widow remarriage. So now they will follow a policy of non-intervention in social and religious matters. Treat all subjects, Indians and the Europeans, basically the Britishers, as equal. That all the Indians and the Britishers will be treated equally. No, they will not be given any extra benefits. So she had promised this thing, but they were been given extra benefits. Third, third point, grant a journal pardon. What do you mean by pardon? Pardon means not to punish anyone who is being found guilty. That is known as pardon. I repeat, not to punish, waive off the punishment for a certain crime to all those who had taken part in the war, except those who were found guilty of murder of British subject. Majority of the Indian soldiers were not given any punishment, but those who were extremely guilty, like they had murdered someone, murdered a British officer, so they were being hanged, but other all were being given pardon. Fourth, do its best to advance the industry in India, to give subsidies, to give extra benefits, so that the cloth industry in India could have a boom. So these were the four promises made by the Queen Victoria. Next question, relation with the princely states. The policy of annexation and doctrine of lapse were abandoned. They were being removed. Now some of the Indian princes had remained loyal to the Britishers and had helped them in suppressing the uprising. When the Indian soldiers had fought with the Britishers, what are princely states? Basically, princely states are states which did not had any hold of the Britishers over them. They were independent states. Those states had Indian rulers, so those are known as princely states. So they had helped the Britishers, and their loyalty was rewarded with the announcement that their right to adopt their heirs would be respected. There is a doctrine of lapse which I had explained you yesterday that was being removed, and the integrity of their territories were being guaranteed against the future annexation. What is the meaning of these three lines? That the Britishers had promised them that the Britishers will not have a war with those princely states, and that guaranteed that they would not annex the princely states. So next is policy of divide and rule. This is the major policy which the Britishers have always had always followed during that time, and which acted that India was being separated into two dominion states, that is India and Pakistan, because Britishers had firmly separated the Hindus and the Muslims. They had partitioned the India and Pakistan. So how they had done that thing, that they had always given priority to Muslims, that they had opened schools, colleges and hospitals for them, and Hindus were being deprived. So Hindus thought that Muslims were supporting Britishers, but both were right. Hindus and Muslims both were right, but the Britishers were successful in creating a rift between Hindus and the Muslims. And how did they do that? That Britishers always supported Muslims and not the Hindus. So Hindus always on the verge to have a fight with the Britishers. They alienated the people from their rulers by giving them special protections and concessions. So they separated, the Britishers separated people from their rulers by giving them special concessions. Also, the government cleverly used the attractions, that is the benefits of government services. What benefits? To give a job, that is a certain government services, to create a split, a rift along the religious line, that is I'm telling, that is Hindus and the Muslims. Hindus and the Muslims had a split. Why they had a split? Because government always gave attraction benefits regarding the government services to only a certain caste of society, a certain section of societies, and others were being deprived of that. So so in this way they created the policy of divide and rule in India. Next, what was the foreign policies? India India's foreign policies was decided by the interest of the British government. It fulfilled two aims, that is protection of its Indian empire, that India the British promised that they would always protect the Indian empire, and they will not allow any uh, foreign body or foreign power to come into India and rule over them. And second, expansion of the British economic and commercial interest in Asia and Africa, that they will try to advance industry, they will try to increase the profit, they will try to give lots and lots of government jobs, profits to the Indian people. But it was just promise, but it was not been given to the Indian people. Next, changes in the army. Before I start this question, this chapter is basically for 10 marks. The weightage is 10 mark of this chapter in boards, and these consequences which we are studying are the most important answers this year, because they haven't been tested from last 2 to 3 years in boards. Last year the board questions were political causes for 4 marks, economic cause for 3 marks, and religious for 3 marks. So I guess this year the consequences plays a major role, that the board the board paper will have these questions, the consequences of the first war of independence. So study it thoroughly. The next question is, there were changes in the army. The Britishers were being alert that they had to make certain changes in the army. We had studied in the military cause that what all defects they had in the military. Britishers had a firm look over that, and what all changes they made. First, we had studied that the Indian soldiers were 4,000, and there were, in comparison to that, there was only one British soldier. So there was a complete changeover in the number of armies in the under the Britishers, that the strength of the European troops in India was increased. The strength of the European troop, all the Europeans were being selected. The ratio of European to Indian troops was fixed at 1:2 in the Bengal army. That is, there should be, if there are two Indian soldiers, in comparison to them, there should be only one European, and 2:5 in the Madras and the Bombay army. In the Madras and the Bombay, what was the ratio? If there are 5 Indians, in comparison there should be at least 2 European soldiers. So this was the changes in the army. First point, European troops were kept in key geographical and military positions. We had studied in military cause that Delhi and Allahabad, which were the main centers of India, in both these main centers there were Indian soldiers, there wasn't any European soldier. So all now it was been changed, and all the major location like Delhi and Allahabad had European troops, and all the Indian soldiers were being removed from there. And I guess third point you all don't have in your new textbook, so instead of that you all can mark this fifth one, which you all have in your new textbook. Fifth point, discrimination on the basis of caste. We had earlier discussed over here regarding the policy of divide and rule, that is Hindus and the Muslims. So they had there was a discrimination on the basis of caste, region, and religion was practiced in the recruitment of the army. That is, majority of the Muslims were being selected, or the Hindus were being selected, and rest other all were being deprived, even if they had the qualification, but they were not being entered, they were not being given the job. So they made discrimination on the basis of caste. And the last one, newspapers, journals, and the nationalist publication. As I told you earlier, there wasn't technology at that time, so all the messages were being passed on only through the newspapers and journals. So the British army prevented the Indian soldiers from using all these newspapers, so that they don't get the feeling of patriotism, that if they hear about any revolt in the country, the message should not pass to the Indian soldiers that what all wrong the Britishers did during that time. So this was all the changes in the army. That is, first they, I repeat that they changed the proportion, which was earlier 4,000 to 1. Next, all the Allahabad and Delhi Indian soldiers have been removed from there. The European troops were placed. Discrimination was been done on the basis of Hindus and the Muslims. And the fourth, all the newspapers and journals have been banned, and they were not allowed to read all any of the matter, any of the revolution that has been taking place. And the second, we are moving on to the next answer. After the war, what all exploitation that the Britishers did with India in the form of economy. Economy means money. All the what all money exploitation that continued from the Britishers' point of view. First is India was turned into a typical colonial economy. Typical colonial economy, exporting raw materials. I had explained you earlier that all the raw materials from India was being sent to England, and they used to be made in the industries in England, and they used to sell all those materials in India. So exporting raw materials export, convert them into finished products, and then importing finished goods and bringing all those goods in India, because of which I told you earlier also that their goods were machine made. So Indian goods could not be in competition with them. So all the peasants, all the farmers, all the craftsmen had lost their jobs because no one was ready to buy the Indian goods, because the Britishers' goods were cheap and also the quality was very good, because everything was machine made. So first point, economic exploitation. India was only a colonial economy that they just kept on increasing. The Britishers kept on increasing their profits. Second point, the salary and the allowances. Allowances, I told you earlier, the extra benefits allowance means of the Secretary of the State and the members of the Indian Council, civil servants, military officers were a large drain on country's resources. We had studied in economic cause, drain of wealth, that all the money from India was being sent to Britain, the England. All the money, India's wealth was being drained. It was being transferred to England in the form of the salaries and allowances of all their members, Secretary of State and everyone. Okay. Next, peasants were impoverished. They did not had food. They did not had jobs under the British rule. The indigo peasants of Bihar revolt on a large scale in 66 and the 68, but they had not got any jobs and they had to face lots of hardship during that time. Next one, rural artisans industries such as handicrafts, spinning, weaving collapsed. Why did they collapse? I just earlier discussed that the British goods were machine made, so no one was ready. It was cheap, so no one was ready to buy the goods from our Indian merchants. So all the artisans had collapsed. They had lost their jobs. They did not had any avenues to earn profits. And the last point of the chapter, that is the rise of nationalism. Hearing all these points, facing all these difficulties, facing all these hardships, the Indians were awake, and from year 1857 there were lots of fights between the Indians and the Britishers, and Indians were not ready to cooperate with the Britishers, because Indians had realized that Britishers were in India. The Britisher in India cannot benefit Indians at any point of time. They had aware of the fact that Britishers in India can only have worse conditions for the Indian people, and they are not going to do anything good. They are not going to bring any better conditions for the India. So how did it rose nationalism? What is nationalism? Desh Bhakti ki bhavana, the feeling of oneness, the feeling of pride for India is known as nationalism. It made the way for the rise of national movement. Andolan, national movement means Andolan. The sacrifices made by the Rani Lakshmibai, Nana Sahib, Mangal Pandey. Mangal Pandey, we had just recollected regarding the Enfield rifle point. He had lost his life fighting for that, to remove the Enfield rifle. And all this revolutionaries served as a source of inspiration for the future freedom fighters. And this heroic struggle also established valuable traditions of resistance to the British rule. Okay, so because of all these points, the Indian freedom fighters, the Rani Lakshmi Bai, in it they created the feeling of nationalism among the Indians, and then after 1857, India started to fight for each and every point. Okay, so we have completed the chapter. All the drawbacks, everything is cancelled. Nature of war is also not there. Okay, and you all have to do only the markings which I have given, and I'm sure the in the boards paper it will be tested only from those things. Okay, so start learning the first chapter, which is for 10 marks in board exam, and from tomorrow we'll start with the next chapter. Okay, bye.